Good morning and welcome. This webinar marks the launch of Guadalupe at the Break of Dawn. This is a new multi-year academic project in which we take a deep look at Lo Guadalupano, the rich and fascinating world of Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe. I'm Dr. Nancy Pineda-Madrid, T. Marie Chilton Chair of Catholic Theology at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, and co-director of this project. I am honored to co-direct this project along with Father Dorian Llewellyn, President of the Institute for Advanced Catholic Studies at the University of Southern California.
Buenos días a todos. Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us.
Domine ad adiuva nome festina.
For almost 500 years, Our Lady of Guadalupe has been at the center of the imagination and hearts of millions of people. Devotion to La Morenita includes a huge range of spiritual practices. She has inspired artists and musicians, and there are whole libraries of books about Lo Guadalupano, as well as sermons, prayers, and poetry. Theologians, historians, and social scientists have produced significant scholarly works on Guadalupe. And there is still so much more to say. That is why we have titled this project, Guadalupe at the Break of Dawn. So what is this project? Each generation, each community, and each academic discipline has its own ways of interpreting Guadalupe. Our multi-year project is about getting different people with their distinct approaches talking to each other. The skeptic and the passionate devotee, sociologists and musicians, pilgrims and mural artists, theologians and historians. Each has something to say, each has something to learn, and together we add our own experience to the mosaic of interpretation.
Guadalupe at the Break of Dawn focuses on three areas. First of all, spirituality. Now, this involves words, prayers, and liturgies and sermons, but it's also about what people do, such as making pilgrimages and processions, offering flowers and songs, and venerating images at home and in the street. And it includes emotions, the thing that bring us tears and laughter, hopes and dreams, courage and resilience. Guadalupe also creates and reflects culture, which is our second focus. Culture involves formal Spanish colonial painting. It also involves the Guadalupe, whose image shows up on clothes and tattoos, on murals, in pop art, in parodies, and reinterpretations. Music from the Baroque compositions of colonial Mexico to popular songs or dances that honor Guadalupe. And culture also means the way that people live, how we think about our particular place in the world. Theology is our third focus. Now, Catholic theology is built on the Bible, tradition, and church teaching. Experience and culture are always present, but their contribution can sometimes be sidelined by the more traditional approaches. Over the last 40 years or so, a lot of Guadalupean theology in the United States has been done from the perspective of some justice issues, such as ethnicity, migration, or gender. And sometimes it's been focused on the experience of very specific groups, such as immigrant communities or Mexican-American women. These approaches have enriched the traditional ways of doing theology, but they sometimes sit uncomfortably with them. What unites spiritualities, cultural practices, and theologies is, of course, Guadalupe's image on the tilma and the first written accounts of the Guadalupean aberrations. The more we bring these experiences and ideas into conversation with each other, the more they're going to be able to help us understand and appreciate the richness of Lo Guadalupano, whatever our faith convictions, our political stances, or our educational backgrounds.
Today we begin by tilling the soil. What are the different ways we can look at Guadalupe? How do we think about her? And what challenges are present in our ways of looking and thinking about Guadalupe? Here's a quick roadmap for today. 3 webinars, each 70 minutes in length. Reading Faith, Theology, History, Justice. At 2 p.m. Pacific Time, we gather for a second webinar, Perceiving Insight, Image, Icon, Interpretation. And then at 5, we conclude the day with webinar 3, Living Faith, Canto, Popular Religiosity, Encounter.
Project. This is an unfolding project. Next year, we'll be moving into stage 2, which is an international academic conference in Los Angeles. We'll have associated events for the public as well, both online and live. And then that will lead up afterwards to stage 3, when we will be putting together a bilingual academic book, essays by people from a range of specialities with a major university publisher. What we want to do is to share the research and the insights and the conversations of this project, and then to spark new questions and new conversations in generations to come.
Thank you, Dorian, and welcome again to all of you. Bienvenidos. We're so delighted that you're joining us virtually today. Again, this first webinar is titled Reading Faith, Theology, History, Justice. For this session, we want to think theologically about what we can learn from 5 centuries of Guadalupean history, and also about how Guadalupe can open up for us new ways of understanding what it means to be Catholic in this democratic society in which we live. To help us do this, our Professor Tim Matovina from the University of Notre Dame, who recently published Theologies of Guadalupe from the Era of Conquest to Pope Francis, and Professor Nichole Flores from the University of Virginia, whose book is being released just this month, The Aesthetics of Solidarity, Our Lady of Guadalupe and American Democracy. Bienvenidos, Nichole and Tim, and thank you so very much for being with us and willing to share your work with us. Just before we hear from our guests, I want to encourage all of you listening and watching to get involved. As you are listening to their remarks, you may have questions or comments that you would like to pose for our guests. Please enter them into the live chat box that you can see on the side of your screen. We will take those questions, we'll take time for those questions and comments after we hear and converse with our guests. Tim, let me begin with you. You have studied Guadalupe for decades and published extensively on her. What are some of the key points of your work on Guadalupe, and what do you think is important for us to think about today?
Thank you, Nancy, and thanks to you and Dorian for the invitation to be part of this conversation. And Nichole, it's great to be with you again today. So there's many, of course, important aspects of Guadalupe. I think one of them is is how the devotion developed to become first a local, regional, then national and international phenomenon. We're going to be hearing today from Jeanette Favreau-Peterson, who's done incredible work on the art history in Guadalupe, from Pedro Rubalcaba, musician, and we'll also from Nichole, of course, in her theological work. And, you know, it's a fascinating story. Most of the times we don't focus on the fact that in colonial Mexico, there were over at least almost 500 known miraculous images of Christ, Mary, and the saints. And Guadalupe at first was just a local one on the hill of Tepeyac, but eventually she became the most widespread one and indeed went beyond a national symbol to an international one. So one of the questions that we can look at through the perspectives of art history, devotion, theology, music, and other areas is, how did Guadalupe grow to become so famous? What was it about her that attracted so many people's devotion and fervor for her? And of course, the art and the devotion, the theology, they all mutually influenced one another. So that's part of what my research has been. You can see here in this image what's known as El Primer Milagro, it's called the first miracle. You see here this man, indigenous person, who has been struck with a spear, with a bow, with an arrow, excuse me. Up here in the upper right-hand corner, the natives are processing with the Guadalupe image from the chapel of Bishop Zumarraga's home to take it out to Tepeyac. This is in 1531, according to the story. And while they did that, they followed a custom that they had of doing mock fights between groups. And one of the natives was accidentally struck with an arrow. And he's here. And he was brought then before Guadalupe and was healed of his injuries. So this is an image, an example of the early local devotion to Guadalupe, which early on was largely confined to Tepeyac and the environs of Mexico City, where natives and Spanish and Criollo subjects became more and more devoted to her. Over time, what was originally a more local devotion became more regional. And here is another image. Now we've skipped a couple hundred years. This is in 1737, when there was a typhoid epidemic in Mexico City and in other places throughout New Spain. And after calling on various patron saints, the faithful finally called on Guadalupe. And you can see them here praying to her. And in the middle of this image, these bodies are people who are suffering and indeed dying from the typhoid. Maybe this is a reminder today of need to pray to Guadalupe during COVID for release from the epidemic of our own time. But Guadalupe, and when they prayed to her, she was credited with fighting back the epidemic and was declared by the people of Mexico City and then other towns and cities as well, the patroness of all New Spain. And eventually the Pope himself agreed with that and declared her the patroness. So this was a key moment in the 18th century when Guadalupe went far beyond being just an important image and Marian figure in Mexico City and the environs, but her fame spread even more and more throughout all of what is now known as Mexico. And then in the 20th and 21st centuries, she was not only the national symbol of Mexico, but has spread really throughout the world. Guadalupe is venerated on every continent now. And this is an image of that, or that kind of reminds us of that. I love this one. The artist is named Katherine Quan, a Korean woman in Los Angeles. And it's a Korean image of Our Lady of Guadalupe and Juan Diego, which reminds us that, of course, she's very, very Mexican, and she has been a great symbol and the mother of Mexico, but she's the mother of everyone and people around the world, and that international fame has come. So one of the great things about this project, and I compliment Nancy and Father Dorian for the way they're doing this, is to bring together people from different perspectives, and we can start to study, how did Guadalupe get to be Guadalupe? How did what started out as a local kind of apparition to Juan Diego become such an international phenomenon? This doesn't happen with every Marian image. There were as many as 50 miraculous images of Mary in Mexico City alone. This is the one that became far more known, far more popular. How did that happen historically? What were the factors in terms of the devotion, the art, the theology, and so on? Going to theology itself, of course, Guadalupe is a fascinating theological subject. She is the only apparition tradition in Catholicism which has a developed theological literature over centuries. And now there are others with great devotion and books written about them, but Guadalupe is the only one that I know of with an ongoing developed theological literature from the 17th century forward. And this is a fascinating set of writings and literatures. Every generation of Mexican history since 1648 has continued to interpret and reinterpret the meaning of Guadalupe theologically for the faith. When you think about it, the second millennium of Christianity, 2,000 years, the two greatest events, I would argue, of that millennium, of that 1,000 years, are the Reformation, both Catholic and Protestant, and the encounter, discovery, and conquest of what Europeans called the New World, of the Americas. We could add as well the encounter of the European world with Africa and Asia. But of course, Guadalupe pertains more to the Americas, or America in the singular, as Pope John Paul put it, I think so well. We are one hemisphere, one continent, one people. And the encounter of peoples 500 years ago, when the European Catholics first arrived in what they call the New World, was a momentous event for them, and of course for the natives who were already here, and for the Africans who unfortunately were brought enslaved to these shores as well, and Asians who later came as well. And we're still trying to figure out what the meaning of this great event is for history. There's a lot of suffering. There was a lot of pain in this event, but there was also the birth of new peoples and new religious practices and expressions. And Guadalupe has been there since the very beginning. Since the very beginning of this conquest and evangelization and encounter of peoples, Guadalupe has been present. And the theologies of Guadalupe have helped us to think through and interpret, what did the encounter of these continents mean? What does the racial divisions and racial coming together of various peoples in these societies, what does that mean for our Christian faith? What do the independence movements that happened in Mexico and the United States and many other places, what do they mean for our Christian faith? What do the struggles of marginalized peoples for justice and dignity, as Nichole will tell us more about in a moment, what does that mean for our faith? And Guadalupe has been used as a theological lens to think about all of those questions. The theologies of Guadalupe really are a theology of America, of all the phases and episodes of the history of this continent that we've gone through in the last 500 years. They're very varied theologies. They don't all agree with one another, but they help us to reflect on what is the meaning of America? What should be the response of a Christian disciple to what has happened and is happening on this continent? What is our responsibility to build a better societies and a better church of greater justice, of greater dignity, of greater faith, of greater evangelization? The theologies of Guadalupe across generations have helped us to think about these very important questions. What do these theologies consist of? Well, in various ways, they all have kind of three elements, some more than others, but they reflect on the image of Guadalupe. From the very first, the writings of the priest, Miguel Sanchez, Imagen de la Virgen María, is a beautiful section where he reflects on what it means to contemplate the beauty of Our Lady of Guadalupe, theologically what that means. And many others have reflected on really what could be called a theology of beauty, theological aesthetics. What does it mean to look on her beautiful image? What does that do to us? What does it mean for our faith? In a certain sense, all of us are like Juan Diego. We contemplate her image and try to enter in deeply what it says to us. We've also reflected on the apparition narrative, especially the Nican Mapoa, the Nahuatl version. What are the evangelical elements of that beautiful story, beautiful account? And finally, we reflect on the devotion of the people themselves as a source for theology. So those are the three sources for our theologies of Guadalupe: the image, the story, and the devotion. And you see here the Virgen de Guadalupe como fuente de la divina gracia, an 18th century image that shows Guadalupe bringing together the Spanish and the natives around the waters of baptism, one of the many beautiful artistic theological reflections on the depth of Guadalupe and her meaning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. Wow, what a wonderful gift you've given us to launch us today. That is just incredible. Thank you very much. I have a million questions, but before we move to that, well, let's bring Nichole in here because she has a lot of richness to share with us as well, of course. Nichole, your work on Guadalupe has engaged many topics, including democracy, migration, family, gender, economics, and race, among others. What does the image of Guadalupe mean today for the life of democracy in the 21st century? And how do you think Guadalupe speaks in our time?
Thank you so much for inviting me to contribute today. And I'm going to take a moment here to share my screen, if that is a possibility. Alrighty. Sorry. Now it's taking my notes away. One moment. Is it possible for me to share my screen and see my notes at the same time? Okay, well, that's not me. All right, one moment. I'll just pull this up and speak from the heart. Thank you so much for having me. And one thing that occurs to me as I begin to reflect on some of the main points that I would want to share to begin our conversation is the story of a gentleman who reached out to me via Twitter after I'd published an article on La Virgen de Guadalupe and her significance for women in our society. And within that article, I just, mentioned that there's myriad and sometimes contested meanings in terms of how Guadalupe has been appropriated both by individuals who are her devotees. And as Dr. Matovina pointed out, this is such a rich and a tremendous tradition that it is hard to pin down just, one single thread as the only way that Guadalupe has been interpreted over the course of 500 years. But this gentleman reached out to me on Twitter, and he told me, he insisted that there's no contested meaning for Guadalupe. And I think, as was pointed out at the beginning of the event and the introductory remarks, the more productive way to think about this, especially in relation to not only the Catholic Church, which of course in itself contains so many different charisms and manifestations of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, but also within a United States democratic context where there are so many different people of different faith backgrounds, racial backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, that to say that there's just one meaning to this is extremely limiting. And instead, we need to think about the mosaic of meanings and how they interact with one another. So one question that's been significant for me in thinking about that has been, what does it, how do we interpret Guadalupe in relation to the many different accounts of the story that is told about her, and especially her relationship with Juan Diego? That particular relationship has really captured my imagination. So first, as we can see here in these images, we see that within the context of the United States democracy, La Virgen de Guadalupe has been leveraged by many different groups to make justice claims that are relevant not just to the private lives of the devotees, but they concern our laws, our institutions, how we organize ourselves within the society. So in this first image, you see the United Farm Workers of America marching behind banners of La Virgen de Guadalupe and processing, demanding economic rights, demanding respect for the dignity of workers, which of course is a prominent cause in relation to La Virgen in the United States. Over in this corner, we see an image of La Virgen de Guadalupe at the March for Life in Washington, D.C., which you may or may not know is an annual march by pro-life advocates. And her image, which of course is portrayed with a black band around her waist, indicating that she is with child in the image, it has become a significant image within the pro-life movement, and over the course of years has gone from one image among many to becoming an increasingly popular and central image at the March for Life in the advocacy, at least among Catholics, pro-life Catholics, for the unborn. And in this bottom corner, so this is not an image from the United States, but it really captures some of the tensions that we see in how Guadalupe has been claimed within both our political and economic lives. We see an image from the Basilica of Our Lady in Mexico City, an image of an exhibit there that is sponsored by Banamex, which is a huge bank in Mexico, and it just, in addition to these political causes, we see that also a capitalist cause has laid claim in this specific instance to the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe. So looking at all of these together, it causes us to ask, how do we interpret this image in relation to these very different and sometimes these ways of thinking about La Virgen that are in tension with one another? So one thing I would like to suggest today is that our interpretation of the image should always account for Juan Diego. And not just that he happened to be the person who was closest by to Guadalupe. She just kind of randomly decided to appear on Tepeyac, and lo and behold, Juan Diego happens to be here. He'll do. I think, and of course, it's important, as Dr. Matovina has emphasized in his scholarship, to attend to the diversity in the earliest accounts of the Guadalupe narrative, but I think especially as manifest in the Nican Mopahua, also known in English, Here It Is Told, which was originally written in Nahua, the native language, that the relationship between Guadalupe and Juan Diego is a special one. It was not an accident that Guadalupe appeared to Juan Diego. She came specifically to him as a person who is described in the Nican Mopahua as a humble commoner. And I love that language because Juan Diego used it to refer to himself. So who do you know in your life who might, they're just a guy or just a gal, just someone who's humble, a humble commoner, a common person. So she came to him. She could have come directly to Bishop Zumárraga, but she chose to come to Juan Diego. And I think that decision that she makes is ethically significant for how we think about this image in relation to our democratic life today. So I think this image on your screen right now does a good job of illustrating this dynamic and keeping in mind the undermining of power dynamics of colonial society through Guadalupe's appearance to Juan Diego. So you see here, and this is a statue, again, at the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico City. You see here Juan Diego standing tall. You know, his shoulders are back, and he is appearing with this beautiful image of Guadalupe on his tilma, or his cloak. And you see him here standing before the bishop, who is, while a powerful man, and perhaps one of the most powerful men of that society, is kneeling before this image and has assumed a humble posture. And this entire scene, for me, resonates with the accounts in the Gospel of Luke of Mary's Magnificat, that God will lift up the lowly and bring the mighty down from their thrones. So we see this biblical reversal of power manifest here in this image and in this story. So I think it's crucial to hold on to that aspect of the story, that Juan Diego is not incidental, and that his identity and his particularity is significant to the story. And just to cap this off, I think it's important to think about the use of Our Lady of Guadalupe in various artistic presentations, and you'll hear more about this later today. But we see here in the sanctuary image of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Denver, Colorado, that she's portrayed as appearing to Juan Diego in this mural. In 2010, this mural that had been painted by a parishioner was covered up by a white wall by approval of both the new pastor of the parish and the Archdiocese of Denver. And while it's been, the mural has been replaced with this replica of the tilma, we see that the entire image has been covered over with this wall, including the image of Juan Diego. So the question I leave you with then is, what is the ethical significance and theological significance of this decision to remove Juan Diego from that image, and how does that bear on how we think about this image within our common life of democracy in the 21st century? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nichole. Wow, so rich. All the ways that you have presented the contested interpretations of Guadalupe. Thank you so much. I see lots of connections between what you presented to us, Nichole, and Tim, what you presented, and also all kinds of different angles in your presentations. So I think it would be good for us to take some time for the three of us to dig in a little deeper and to have a conversation for a few minutes. And then after our conversation, we'll open it up to questions from all those listening. So let me ask you each if you would have a question for each other, or want to make a comment on each other's work, and I'll jump in here as well as we go along. So please. Tim, I don't know if you want to launch us here.
Sure, thank you. Nichole, thank you for that, and thanks for your book. This was, Nichole didn't ask me to do this. You should read her book if you're interested in Guadalupe, those of you who are watching this. What I see you doing, among many other things, but what's really most impressive to me, we hit kind of a postmodern moment of Guadalupe. You know, she means so many different things to so many different people, and that's beautiful. It's part of the power of the image. But is there a way we can start to talk about, you know, which meanings are more legitimate, and without just simply one group imposing its interpretation on another group? So it's very tricky ground, and you have provided us with others. I know other Latinx theologians are also working in this same vein, but you, and actually Professor Pineda-Madrid also in her work has done the same sort of thing. How do we look at not just Guadalupe, but the relationship between Guadalupe and Juan Diego? You know, I heard a sermon once that said, the priest said to us, you cannot love Our Lady of Guadalupe if you don't love the poor one, Juan Diego, whom she loved and whom she sent. It's in that relationship that the ethics of Guadalupe come forth. And that doesn't provide all the answers, but it provides a lens through which we can start to ask ourselves, well, with all these meanings, is it just whatever meaning's in the eye of the beholder? Or is there some way we can converse together and come to a deeper common ground, a deeper common understanding of what Guadalupe means? And I think your intervention, that the way to do that is to focus on her love for Juan Diego and the relationship between Juan Diego and Guadalupe. I think that's a way forward that we all should follow.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. I do think that one piece that I'm taking away from your work, which was published as I was starting to finish mine off, so I kind of wish I could go back and have had deeper fertilization from your own work, Dr. Matovina, in mine, because I think it, even in making these interpretive moves and thinking about Guadalupe within the realm of ethics, to do that in a way that is unhinged from her history, I think is really risky. And I think it's one of the challenges that we face in having so many people, so many different political groups, to be frank, laying claim to her image. Now, I don't want to say that's necessarily a bad thing, that both, the United Farm Workers and the pro-life movement see deep resonance. And in fact, there could be, possibility for deeper conversations and building of coalitions within our fantastically diverse society. If you think about Latina feminists who are starting to advocate more forthrightly for better childcare arrangements or better healthcare options for mothers based on this image of Guadalupe, and you think about the goals of the pro-life movement, that maybe the possibility of finding consensus is in trying to interpret this image in a way that brings us together in some way, rather than continues to create chasms in our politics and our democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah, so true. As I listen to both of you, part of what I'm really struck by in both of your presentations is just the enormity, and we keep going over and over this again and again, the enormity of diverse interpretations of the same image. And what that says to me as a scholar as well, doing research and writing on Guadalupe, is that what we have here is a symbol. The image, the Nicamapoa, the devotion, all of that and more indicates that what we're working with is a symbol. And the nature of symbols is that they're fecund, that they suggest all kinds of different interpretations. They do exactly what you're pointing out, Nichole, and also Tim, your own work in your book, which is very striking because we see diverse interpretations of Guadalupe from a lot of different perspectives. And the way she has read today, the ethical approach to her today, is not the kind of normative way that she has been interpreted historically. So given that, I think we're struck by the conundrum, which is a question both of you have raised, of how do we make judgments about interpretations, and how do we consider where this goes? And I don't know if you all have thought about where we go with this.
Mm-hmm.
Nichole, you want to go first this time?
Sure. Well, I think that, again, the significance of delving into the history of the image, and not just, the accounts of her apparition, but deep into the myriad theological accounts, into the sermons, into the accounts, especially within the social sciences, of devotion and practice is really crucial, because it brings to the surface for us both a descriptive account of what has been done and what people have, what meaning people have given to this image, while also inviting us to think more deeply within that material about the normative significance of the image. But beginning with the descriptive, I think, is really essential, especially given I think in a lot of cases, the lack of familiarity with the nearly 500 years of history of the image. So I think that would be my initial remark, that there's a necessity for that I think gets sometimes put in the background as we try to have, arguments over what this image really means. Well, a part of a more careful contemplation would require us to be more attentive to that history, theological, sociological, et cetera.
Yes, I agree very much with that, Dr. Flores. Thank you. The original book, first theological book, Miguel Sanchez, it's such a fascinating kind of trajectory. We're going to hear more about this from Carlos Garcia at one of the later sessions today. But when you think of theologies of the Virgin Mary in the Catholic Church, you're usually thinking about Mary in the Gospels, the Marian dogmas like Mary, Mother of God, Theotokos, the Immaculate Conception. And all of these come in and out of Guadalupan theologies, of course, in various ways. But what's striking is, from that very first book, what the overall kind of arching theme of all these theologies, in one way or the other, is the evangelization of America. There's an historical trajectory there, and as we've been saying, and not everyone agrees exactly with what everyone else says. It's different nuances. But from the very beginning, it's not just thinking about the traditional teachings of Mary in the Catholic Church. It's about thinking about the role of Guadalupe in creating a new society and a church on this continent, on this soil. And that's what Pope John Paul II said about Guadalupe in the end. She's the evangelizer of America, the star of the new evangelization, he said about her. And really, from Miguel Sanchez, the first Guadalupan theologian, to Pope John Paul II and theologians today, one way or the other, there's kind of a connective tissue there. We're thinking about what is the meaning of Guadalupe for what we're supposed to be doing as Christian disciples, as human beings on this continent. And while not all the answers are the same, there's a strong historical trajectory there. And I think, in addition to what you have contributed so well, we should be focused on the relationship of Guadalupe and Juan Diego as an interpretive lens. We should root every interpretation in that long history and try to see ourselves connected to the generations of people who came before us, who like us, loved Guadalupe and wanted to know what she meant for their lives.
That's a really exciting way to put that, because I think within Catholic theology and ethics, the emphasis on the kinds of relationships we have with others, I think we've done a great job, and an increasingly good job in contemporary theology, to highlight our fundamental relationality and how deeply we're connected with everyone around us. But we also have resources, profound resources within the Catholic tradition for thinking about our relationships across generations. And this call to attend to the history is a relational call on a really fundamental level. It's, how do I relate to these other people who either were devoted to La Guadalupana, or who studied her, or who were fearful of her power, or what have you? How do I relate to them across centuries is a deeply relational question, and one that calls us to a kind of communion with one another across an intellectual communion across generations. That's a really exciting idea to me.
Well, I love the way you're saying that, Nichole, because we're in COVID right now. There may be people watching this webinar who have suffered the loss of loved ones, who have had people, their loved ones die. And we know from our Catholic faith, the communion of saints, but Latinos, Hispanics know this very, very deeply. Death is not the final say. you're deeply connected to your ancestors. The indigenous people knew this. The Catholic evangelizers knew this. And the saints, Mary as the first of the saints, Juan Diego as the great saint that he is, these are not folks that are just floating around there up there in heaven. They're very much part of our daily lives. And it's been that way for 500 years. So this deep connectedness is part of what Guadalupe means, and part of the way we can ascertain and discern what does she mean today by seeing ourselves as deeply connected to Juan Diego, to Guadalupe, and to the literally millions and millions of ancestors who are part of this family called the Guadalupanos.
Absolutely.
I love that, because I think what it also puts on the table for us is both of you here with attention to history and the connection across generations, as you mentioned, Nichole, and as Tim, you expanded on. I think that that begins to put together a norm for us about meanings, and it starts to map out a space for this. But I also think it suggests to us, of course, because we're going across generations, it suggests to us that we that there is no one single meaning, and there really in many ways can't be. That we have to have a kind of open-ended awareness of the fact that this is going to draw forward in all kinds of different ways. So that's where I see this going.